Hey everybody, it's Alex, the CEO at Motoroso.com, and in this video we're talking about the 2.5 series coilover shocks from King Shocks for the brand new 21 and up Ford Bronco. Now, in our supply chain hampered world, we've been waiting more than a year for this, as well as for the Fox 2.5 DSC shocks, which we're planning to put on our own Bronco build. We'll be making a separate video about that later. But as is not too uncommon when it comes to King, it looks like they won the race. These guys have been one of the top manufacturers of off-road high-performance suspension in the truck segment for over 20 years. They do a lot of design, development, testing, and racing at the upper echelons of racing, like in the Baja 1000. These guys are dead serious about suspension. For those who are just looking for a modest bump in performance and the ability to raise your ride height on your Bronco, these are probably going to be a massive overkill for you. There are some other great value options out there, specifically something like the Fabtech Coilover lift kit, which we made a video about. We'll put a link to that right here. That's going to really satisfy 80 to 90% of people's needs. But for those that really want to push the outer limits of performance, want control and adjustability over their shocks, and are looking for really the best suspension that you can get for your Bronco, then you're going to want to consider looking at this King Shocks offering. You're going to pay a little bit more for these things, but the extra features and functionality really are going to deliver the maximum amount of performance you can achieve. Now, we're going to put links to these products in the description of this video, and I'll put a link to the front shocks right here. Those links will take you over to Motoroso.com, as usual, where you can buy these products. You can also reach us there on live chat or call us toll free at 833-MOTOROSO. So first we'll talk about the construction and the features in these shocks, and then we'll talk about why you care about those. In other words, what's it going to do for the Bronco? The 2.5 in this means that the shock body is a 2.5 inch shock body, and that means it's got enough volume inside to hold a lot of fluid. Oil specifically, and of course that's going to help with the damping, and it's going to help, the more oil you can put in there, it's going to help handle the heat that can get generated over long and intense off-roading sessions. Now, steel as a material can corrode and can get rusted, and so they've coated this in zinc to make sure that it doesn't decay and corrode on you, and it stands up to the tough conditions you're very, very likely to put it through. Now, the other steel component on these shocks is the shock shaft. That's made out of induction cold hardened steel. That's going to be extremely strong and rigid, and it's coated with a extremely strong finish as well to make sure that the rocks and debris that can get in there don't score the surface and then damage the seal, ultimately helping the shock last a long time and last over time. One thing to notice about King shocks, though, is that they are fully rebuildable and serviceable. That's a very important feature of a shock at this level, meaning that once you've made this investment, and if they do start to deteriorate after you've been beating the hell out of them, you can actually get them rebuilt so they'll just keep on performing for you. Now, to help protect that shock shaft even further in the rear, they've added these cool plastic rock guards, which I really like. Now, the remote reservoir on these shocks is a very important component of why these things perform as well as they do. First of all, it helps keep everything cool. It's got a lot more oil in the system as a result, and that shock oil is circulated thanks to the floating piston in here to make sure that that oil is moving around and pulling heat away from the shock so that the damping is consistent over those long, grueling sessions. Additionally, the remote reservoir itself has these aluminum fins that help, as air flows over them, helps pull heat away from the remote reservoir, keeping the oil inside nice and cool. Now, the other piece of technology you're going to find in these remote reservoirs is their floating piston. Now, this is a nitrogen charged chamber, and that means that they've pressurized it with a setting that they've determined at the factory to be optimal to make the valving work exactly the way that they want it to. Now, you can change the pressure in here, but unless you're really advanced in suspension tuning, I recommend leaving it the way that they've set it and using the damping adjustment that we'll talk about in a moment. But just know that if you want to change the characteristics beyond what they've sent you from the factory, that can be done by working with them to change the pressure in this nitrogen chamber. But the floating piston that's in here is really important because what that does is make sure that the gas and the oil stay separate in the shock. What can happen in shocks that don't have that separation can cause the oil and the air, or sorry, the oil and the nitrogen to blend up, causing something called cavitation. What that means is those bubbles are then floating in the oil, and as those move through the valving, that can change the characteristics of the way that the shock works. This ensures that that doesn't happen, and as it moves through its stroke, it's ensuring that oil is cycling through the shock, again, helping with all that cooling. Now, just another note of attention to detail that King is including in their shocks. They developed these new anodized blue remote reservoir mounts, which are going to look so much better than those traditional hose clamps that we've been using for years. So I really like that they've added that as well. Now the next feature is really the most important feature of these shocks, and it is what makes them adjustable, and that is the compression damping adjustment. Now it is a single compression damping adjustment. Some shocks are going to offer high and low speed compression damping, others are going to offer compression damping and rebound damping. In this case, the compression cycle of the shock is how much force it takes essentially to compress the shock to go through its stroke. So as you change this from softer to firmer, you're going to be changing how the shock reacts to the inputs of the wheels. So if you know you're going to be on a super high speed desert run with potentially big hits, you may want to have that in the firmer setting so you don't blow through your suspension travel. If you know you're going to be in slow rock crawling situations with tons of boulders and baby heads, you might put that in the softer setting so you just flow over everything. But the main message here is that you can adjust and tune exactly the way that this suspension feels for you. And if you know you're going to be driving the thing as a daily driver, you're going to put it in the firmer setting so it handles nice on the street, and then throw it in the softer settings when you go off-road. The ability to change this is really giving you control over the way your Bronco feels, and that is why this is worth the upgrade. That's why this is worth the money, is to tune exactly what you want out of these things. And it's a nice, easy adjustment that's right there on that remote reservoir. You reach in, give it a few clicks, and get it set exactly the way you want it. Now they're also going to be making this shock in a non-adjustable version, and that'll save you a few $100. But my bottom line in this is, if you're spending this much money, I don't know why you would do that. Yes, they're going to be great. You're going to bolt them up. They're going to work very, very well. But you're losing all of that control just to save a few $100. And they know this. So they've actually stopped making the non-adjustable version for this year. They're only going to make the adjustable version, and they'll come out with that other one later on. They recognize if you're going to spend this much money, just get yourself the adjustable version so you have the control. Even if you never use it, it's just nice to know it's there, but you will use it. Now, for those that want to get really geeky, they want to know if this is a linear or a progressive spring in these shocks. These are linear springs. King does not use progressive springs in any of their shock designs. Now, the linear springs that are on here, though, these are made to be really an OEM replacement. They can handle a little bit more weight, but if you're going to start adding a lot of extra weight, like you're going to build an overlanding rig and throw a bunch of weight on top of your Bronco, plus heavy steel bumpers and winches, then you might run into a situation where these are going to sag too much into their travel, and you're not going to be able to add enough spring preload to overcome that. So of course you can have the springs swapped out for a higher spring rate if you know you're going to be building a very, very heavy Bronco. But if you'd like to talk through that stuff with us, we can help you customize the shock in the future. But for the most part, out of the box, this is going to work for most people and their Bronco builds. So now let's talk about the actual performance gains you're going to see here. Now, first of all, what you're going to gain is the expertise of King's ability to build some of the best suspension in the world. The way they will have built and valved these shocks is going to yield one of the smoothest, most comfortable rides you can imagine and handle the off-road punishment you can throw at it. But specifically, you're going to gain ride height control. Out of the box, when these bolt on, they're going to be about 2 inches taller than a base Bronco. So the eye-to-eye length of the shock and where the spring is set is going to be 2 inches taller than a non-Sasquatch Bronco. If you have a Sasquatch Bronco and you bolt them in the way they come out of the box, you're going to be 1 inch taller than when you started. You can then add up to 2 full inches of ride height from there. You can be 4 inches taller than a base Bronco or 3 inches taller than a Sasquatch Bronco. Once you get up to 3 inches taller than a Sasquatch or 4 inches taller than the base, you're going to have enough room to fit 37-inch tires as long as you have added an aftermarket upper control arm. And of course, when you put this all together, you must be careful to look at everything and make sure you've got the proper clearance. You may have to do a little bit of trimming of plastic parts or even some of the metal parts in the chassis, but you should be able to fit 37s without too much trouble. As I mentioned earlier, you're also going to see an increase in overall wheel travel. So in the front, you're going to gain 3 inches, and that means at the end, you're going to have an 11.5-inch total amount of wheel travel, which is quite a big increase for an independent front suspension car. Now in the rear, you've got a solid axle. You're only going to gain about a half to 1 inch of travel, and that's going to yield about 11 inches of full travel. Now I said it earlier, but I'm going to say it again just to reiterate that all the performance numbers I just said, you're only going to get if you actually pair this with a replacement upper control arm like this one from Baja Kits. There are other options in the industry, but this beautiful billet machined aluminum upper control arm is going to give the extra articulation that you need to gain the additional performance. Of course, also the strength that you need. Now you should also be pairing this with a replacement trailing arm. That's in the rear, and there's a matching one available available from Baja kits. We're going to make a separate video about that, and we'll put a link to that in the description. But we can also help pair this system with the control arms that you need to make the whole thing work together based on what you're trying to accomplish and what your budget is. And of course, we're going to put links to all of these in the description. I'll put a link to the rear shocks right here. Those will take you over to Motoroso.com, where you can shop for these products, reach us on live chat, or call us toll free at 833-MOTOROSO. If this is going to be too much for you, check out that Fabtech lift kit I mentioned. That video is right over here. That might be a great fit for you as well. Make sure you subscribe to our channel for all of our upcoming videos. Thanks for watching.